Hi there, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'm H2Ho, the H stands for Harley, and I'm here with the Kite Trust today to speak to you guys about herstory, specifically the herstory of drag and where it all came from. So, let's get on with it then. So in around the 1900s, or in the Victorian era, drag performers were actually quite popular as a sort of family event. You would go with children or, a giggly couple or something would attend these comedic freak show performances that usually were consisting of trans and queer and gender non-conforming individuals who would perform, for example, such as bearded ladies or half men, half women, and other people with physical abnormalities or deformities that would be referred to as freaks of nature. Despite the popularity of these shows, though, if men were found in women's clothes outside of these performances, they would be arrested for things like the abominable crime of buggery or prostitution. For example, the 2017 movie The Greatest Showman actually describes the story of how P.T. Barnum, who is one half of the Barnum and Bailey circus, which was the most famous circus, included a bearded lady her actual name was Annie Jones. In 1904, the first stage performance of Peter Pan was actually the lead character was played by a woman, Nina Bosico. And then in the first production of Peter Pan, they had him played by Betty Bronson. Later on, in keeping on with this tradition, people like Mia Farrow and Allison Williams also then followed suit and were females who then played Peter Pan. In the late 19th and early 20th century, drag entered the American vaudeville show scene. One of the best known, if not the best known actress at the time was Julian Eltage, who was very famous for his portrayal of the fascinating widow. It was around this time, around the 1920s, that ball cultures, or drag ball culture, was very prominent and started in Harlem, New York. But actually the first drag ball could be traced back as far as 1867 in the Hamilton Lodge in Harlem. In 1870, the Reynolds newspaper in the UK printed the word drag in a gender-bending context, referring to a party invitation where it was said that "we shall come in drag," meaning men dressed in women's costume. In around the 1920s, drag, the word, started being used specifically by queer people, and the theory where it comes from was from Polari, which was this secret language that queer people had for each other to be able to speak in public without really being, outed. And Polari itself drew on a lot of theater terms, amongst other languages and slang. So that's kind of where it entered the queer culture to be very dominant queer slang, and not just for theater anymore. Polari itself actually came about from the criminalization of homosexuality in England, and of course you can then see why a new language would be formed to be able to speak with each other without being arrested. The danger in bars and the segregation in the 1920s is really what paved the way for black queer people to develop drag ball culture. Usually in people's houses, they would have house parties where black queer people would come together and celebrate and sort of have their fun. And that's really where the scene started. Both males and females would come together and they would get all dressed up and they would compete, for the best gown and the best feminine figure, etc., etc. And then by 1927, the word drag had now quite more officially, in terms of academia and journals, been associated with the queer community. For example, A.J. Rosenoff's Manual of Psychiatry described drag as an outfit of female dress worn by a homosexual or an actual event, a social gathering of homosexuals in which some are dressed in female attire. So at the turn of the 20th century, women also started dressing up as men much more often and performing, such as, for example, Gladys Bentley, who was part of the Harlem Renaissance. She would wear a top hat and tails, and this is around the time of when the term drag king is believed to have started becoming used.